Providing a dose of rationality, critical thinking, and skepticism from a conservative atheist perspective, this is the Bitchspot Report podcast. Every week, your host will bring you news of note and commentary on topics of interest in hopes of sparking intelligent discussion on important issues of the day. It's not pretty, it's probably not safe for work, but we tell it like it is and offer no quarter to the credulous, the gullible, or the downright stupid. It's not for the easily offended or for the religiously or liberally minded, but it is about 90 minutes of secular conservative entertainment. So let's get right to the show. It's that time again. It's howdy. Wait a minute. No, sorry, that's wrong. It's time for the Bitchspot Report podcast, that weekly podcast that takes on political, social, and religious issues of the day and dives deep to explore them. This week we got creationism, religious violence, political stupidity, and states striking back at the federal government. Plus, we got a discussion inspired by our last show on the importance of marriage. It's going to be a cool 90-ish minutes, so please stay tuned. So how's it going?
Oh, I'm surviving. Everyone is surviving, and we should now be bathed in my wisdom.
Oh, good. That's
you might
good.
want to take another shower after you're bathed in my wisdom.
Yeah. I don't think I want to go there right now.
So it's, creationism, always raising fuzzy.
Yeah, well, I mean, all this stuff is really, it's the same stuff that goes on over and over and over and over and over again. And we talk about it, about how stupid it is, and people just continue to be stupid. And I get really tired of stupid people.
Yeah, this is just, I want to say something about when people talk about teaching the controversy. There is no controversy.
Right. There has never been a controversy. The controversy went away decades and decades and decades ago, and the religious have nothing to say.
Yeah. And the problem, of course, is that when we look at this story, it's a California high school teacher. First of all, it's important to note that high school kids are remarkably vulnerable to this kind of BS. Most kids in high school don't have a lot of knowledge about how to evaluate bias in their instructional materials. They're kind of programmed to believe that the teacher knows what he's talking about. That's not always the case. Good high schools try to get into bias. Good teachers try to get into bias. But the fact of the matter is you don't really touch bias and secondary and primary materials until you hit college.
Right.
So this is a case, and this kind of thing, first of all, again, there is no debate on creationism. No scientific debate. It's a bit like the debate of whether or not I can fly if I jump off a building and flap my arms real hard on the way down.
Yeah.
So my belief will not keep me from going splat and really annoying the cleaning crew that's going to break out the high pressure hoses.
Yeah. Well, we should actually probably get into the news then, since we're already talking about it.
Oh, true.
And now the news.
Science teacher Brandon Pettinger of Arroyo Grande High School has gotten himself in trouble for trying to sneak creationism into his classroom. He's taken to showing last year's Bill Nye versus Ken Ham debate as a way to teach the controversy. There is no controversy. Creationism has lost, just like Ken Ham lost the debate. There's simply no valid controversy here. The school has told Pettinger to stop using any form of creationist nonsense in his classroom, and they've scrubbed all online school resources of anything creationist. So how long do you think it'll be until they all start screaming a bunch of religious discrimination?
Well, in this case, they'd be wise not to, because there really is no religious discrimination here. It's a science class. He's not being prevented from talking about creationism on his own time. He's not even being prevented from arguing for creationism. So, not much room for a religious harassment lawsuit here. In fact, if anything, it could be pointed in the opposite way. I think it's also important to note that huge swaths of Christianity do not believe in the literal creation. Literal creationism is a minority even within Christianity. The Catholic Church, I think, has had, as part of their dogma that, evolution is real ever since, pretty much ever since it came out as an articulated theory, though I can't be certain about that. But, this is a case where he's using something to try to teach a controversy that A, doesn't exist, and B, has been turned into a controversy by far-right religion.
Right. Well, and the thing is, I don't get, because this always comes up in these cases, but I don't get the idea of they're violating my free speech in these cases. And I know we're going to talk more about this in the next story, but when somebody's paying you to do a thing, you aren't free to speak badly about it or go off on tangents without suffering consequences. This guy was hired to teach science, not religion, not mythology, science. He has no business whatsoever teaching something for which he's not being paid. If he wants to teach religion, he can go get a job at a religious school where they're paying him to teach religion. This is just ridiculous, but this is what the religious fucktards try time and time again, going, oh, well, we're being persecuted and we're being discriminated against. No, you're not. You're being paid to do a job. Do that job.
Right. And to make a point, if he, like, say, had the kids study this and then said, okay, I want you to go to a creationist site and tell them how wrong they are, he would equally be at fault. He's involving the kids in a debate that is not supposed to be part of his job description. His job description is not to try to promote a political debate in either direction. He is supposed to talk to the kids, to educate the kids. And this does not do it. And that's really a problem you have with some of these teachers, is that they will come into a school and they will say, well, we'll do our job except when it conflicts with our beliefs.
Yeah, but they try that everywhere. I mean, that's the big thing that's going on right now, is they're saying they'll follow the law except when it gets in the way of their beliefs, at which point in time the law is something they can just ignore. And that's something we need to teach these people that they don't get to do.
No. And of course the problem is, many of them try to present themselves as civil disobedience in the theme of Martin Luther King. And the important point there is that Martin Luther King went to jail. Civil disobedience was not about trying to evade the consequences of breaking the law. What they want to have their cake and eat it too.
Well, of course. And that's the thing about civil disobedience, is you actually have to be caught, you have to be prosecuted, and you have to be convicted as a means of revisiting whether these laws are actually valid or worthwhile. These people, they don't want any consequences of any kind. They just want to be able to do what the fuck they want to do and screw everybody else.
Right. And, this is a situation where I don't think it's going to get any better. I think these people aren't going to re-examine themselves. So it's just going to be a continual case of someone gets hired, someone gets reprimanded, or in some cases terminated. My argument would be, I do not see how a science teacher can believe in young earth creationism and still consider himself a valid science teacher, because it kind of requires a really explicit ignoring of reality going on there.
Yeah, but if somebody came up and said, I believe in leprechauns and I'm going to teach the science of leprechauns, they'd get fired too. And they should be. And nobody can sit around and go, oh, well, we're discriminating against the leprechauns believers.
And that is one of the things that these people dislike, because of course, increasingly, a good science education, well, that shows you how ridiculous young earth creationism is. Young earth creationism literally requires an omnipotent God who is a dick, pardon my French, and who is deliberately setting you up for a fall. It cannot just happen. The only way it can be reconciled to the world we observe is if God exists and God is doing everything he can to trick mankind into making an error for which he will then punish us for.
And it's not like that has no reference in the Bible or anything.
Well, no. And of course another point is again, this whole literal creationism, young earth literal creationism, is fairly unique to right-wing Christianity. It starts in the 1920s, or earlier than that. And of course, what a lot of these people miss, because they'll always talk about the Scopes monkey trial. Everyone loves talking about the Scopes. But one of the factors is, one of the reasons it was a big deal, one of the reasons why the Scopes trial was by William Jennings Bryan worked for the prosecution, had very little to do with the actual biblical nature of young earth creationism. William Jennings Bryan was mainly using it as a way to attack social Darwinism, which was a big factor in the 1920s. So these people are also missing a lot of the underpinnings of the hostility to evolution that was widespread in that era, because evolution had, of course, been used as a backing for a number of racist and social Darwinist viewpoints, which it isn't anymore. It's outlived them. So these people are wrong on the facts. They're completely misjudging the history of the debate. And unfortunately, they're getting paid money to teach science.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're certainly not alone. I mean, one of the first things that really got me into debating the whole creation evolution bit was the case of John Pelosa back in the mid-90s, where he was a biology teacher in San Juan Capistrano, California. He insisted on teaching creationism in his classroom because he had a right to counter the quote-unquote religion of evolutionism. And it went to court, and he lost miserably. And then he tried to take it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court just completely declined to hear it because it was just so open and shut. And they had already ruled that creationism, intelligent design, all this other religious bullshit did not belong in any school anywhere, period.
Right. And of course the problem is that, I mean, they'll occasionally try to bring up intelligent design, and it's always a cover for creationism because you never hear an intelligent design class which, for instance, I think was it Hoyle that had the cloud theory of spores coming to Earth?
Yeah.
Yeah. No intelligent design, course design ever talks about Hoyle, which was a legitimate scientific theory, albeit one that's largely debunked today. They'll always just try to leave it nebulous, and it's plain that what they really want you to think is that they're talking about intelligent design by God, not intelligent design because Zork 7 Zork accidentally sneezed and left a booger in a puddle of water on prehistoric Earth.
Yeah. Well, you gotta remember, they will take things that Hoyle said, rip them completely out of context because they want you to think that he's for religious biblical creationism, which he completely is not. But you look at like Hoyle and, damn, I'm going to screw up his name because I always do, but Chandra, I can't even say it. I'm sorry. I can't pronounce Indian names. My bad. But, their whole thing was panspermia and, life coming from other places in the universe. They had no love for religious creationism at all.
No.
At all.
And of course, the problem with religious creationism is, again, we get back to the fact that even among, like, for instance, you ask your average rabbi, when was the earth created 6,000 years ago? He's going to look at you like you're a nut. And he's going to mention that entire story is not meant to be taken literally at all. It is a story. It is a parable. But in America, we have a huge number of people who everything in the Bible must be 100% true, except for the parts they don't like. And therefore, you must abide by the Bible 100% as if it was 100% dictated written word of God. There is not a single part in this that is not true. Then they turn around and tell you how the King James Bible is the only proper Bible.
Yeah, you mean the one that was demonstrably wrong in just about everything.
Right. The one that was written by King James to enforce his rulership over Britain, which is why there is so much stress on obedience to the authority. I mean, it's ridiculous. But there are seriously people out there who seem to think that, the biblical patriarchs spoke with these and thous and wherefores and I shall begat, and it was all this nice English that, just doesn't exist even today.
Right.
It's an unfortunate thing, and I'm happy. I have to admit, I'm happy the school stomp on this. Because, seriously, I've taught, and it's scary to say, but as cynical as a lot of teenagers like to come across as being, they are actually extremely vulnerable to anyone who's even the slightest bit clever. Because they don't have the life experience.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a big problem with young people anyways. They don't know any better, and they haven't gotten that degree of life experience where they can actually make those kind of decisions on their own.
Right. And of course, a teacher is always in a position of authority. Teacher can screw up your grades. If you are hoping to get into a good school and you want to get a good grant, that could be a serious, even if unspoken threat, especially if you realize that, okay, he's teaching something he believes in. So, it's not a good idea for this to happen. And like I said, I'm happy that in this case, there wasn't any huge case that was, the school found out and, decided that, no, this is not what we're going to have happen.
Yeah, which is a good thing, and I hope that's a trend that continues, where these schools realize that this crap doesn't fly. That if they go to court, they are going to lose, they're going to be out the money, and there's nothing they can do about it. There's no chance in hell they're ever going to win.
Right. And, it will be nice if increasingly schools just start doing that, because that's going to be one key to getting this out, because a lot of these advocates, they want a lawsuit. They want a hill to die on. If it just turns into you've got a meeting at 8:30 a.m. with the principal and a representative from Human Resources, it's not much of a hill to die on, and hopefully they'll stop doing that and start doing their jobs. Because no one's saying he cannot believe in creationism. Like I said, I find it difficult to see a scientist believe creationism. But even so, there is absolutely nothing in this article, nothing in the law that says that he cannot go out and preach it, he cannot go out and believe it, he cannot go out and put things on his Facebook on it, just that he cannot use the captive audience of his students preach.
Yeah, but you have to remember that that's really how these people think. I mean, I've been doing a lot of, I hesitate to call it research, but I've been doing an awful lot of listening to, like, William Lane Craig, and he's got the typical religious bias that he won't admit. You know, he basically sits down and says, if there's anything out there that disagrees with, the word that the Holy Spirit is writing on my heart, then that has to be wrong, because my religious beliefs can never, under any circumstances, ever be wrong at all, and there's no point even talking about it.
Right, which, interestingly enough, is somewhat blasphemous from the religious viewpoint, because that says that I hold my beliefs to be the highest thing, and of course, you're not supposed to. In a religious Christianity, one of its core statutes is that humans are always flawed. Humans can be wrong. Usually you're wrong, usually you're most wrong when you think you're right. So a lot of these people, what they're also doing is they're even failing to re-examine their beliefs as their religion would demand.
Yeah, but they haven't examined their beliefs in the first place. They don't care.
Because, well, and it's also a frightening thing, because what if you're wrong? I mean, let's face it, some of these people have, expelled people from their families, for the gay thing, gay children. Many religious families have cast their children out onto the street, which I honestly cannot even conceive of anything a family member of mine would do that would make me want to do that. But, to re-examine your viewpoints that led you into that area is deeply terrifying, and of course you don't want to do it, and it's easy not to do it if you just say, well, that's my religion. I have no choice.
Yeah, well,
and we all have choices.
Well, you'd like to think so anyway, but these people are creationists, and they're believing things that pretty much everybody on the planet, except for them, has rejected and found utterly obnoxious. And there are people in other countries that just look at us and go, what in the fuck is wrong with you people? Why is there anybody in your country at all that believes this ridiculous nonsense?
Yeah, well, and of course it also hurts their religion. I mean, the funny thing is that creationism, I think, is a major factor among a lot of people causing them to leave the religion, because it becomes so obviously incorrect when you look at anything. I mean, again, you have to decide either God hates you or it's wrong. And if a church makes creationism the cornerstone of what it is to be a member of that church, and you decide creationism is wrong, you're going to go right out that door.
Yeah, but these people don't care. That's the problem, is they're not interested in the religion. They're not interested in the church. They're not interested in any of that. They're interested in their personal, emotional, coddling nonsense. As long as they feel good, they can be the only one sitting in an empty room. They don't care about anybody else. They don't care about it being reasonable.
And it also creates a lovely sense of persecution. Because let's face it, a lot of these people, I think for many of these people, the worst thing you could do to them would be to ignore them, because they love the idea that they are the persecuted chosen of God. And then the rapture is going to come, and we're all going to be left on the earth while they're looking down. Never mind, the rapture has no biblical backing, but a lot of this is based on a need to be persecuted.
Right. They're doing what is essentially the same as the left wings, playing the victim card. They're just doing it on the right wing side.
Yeah, and so it's, like I said, this story is actually a pretty cheerful story, because in the 70s and 80s, a lot of times you would get the entire damn school district doing it. And, the parent would actually have to go, not simply to the local courts, because the local courts were usually in bed and they would rule against it. And then you had to go all the way up to the federal courts, and meanwhile their kids were getting every kind of harassment under the sun. So it's nice, granted this is California, so I'm certain we still got school districts like the bad old days in some parts of America, but at least now we're getting it to where it's more of a non-story. It's, it's a story that tells us that the system is working.
Well, and the system is working, because every single time that this goes to any kind of courtroom, these people lose. And it doesn't matter if it's a local court, it doesn't matter if it's a federal court, it doesn't matter if it's a Supreme Court. All of them has said, this does not fly, this will never fly, there is no way you can possibly get this to fly, knock it the fuck off.
Right, well, and because local judges really hate to get overridden. I mean, it's a fairly black mark on a judge's record if the appellate courts just override him, saying, hey, you didn't even apply the law. And, for parents out there, one important thing this is that, be polite, don't yell, because I'll tell you, yelling, screaming parents a lot of times are their own worst enemies. But when you hear stuff like this, he may have only been banned now because this was the first time his administration heard about it. So it's always important that if you do hear problematic stuff going on in school, you don't need to be aggressive at first. I mean, obviously, if nothing changes, you want to get a little more aggressive. But bringing it up to the administration in a non-confrontational way, you may find them they give a blank and say, wow, we didn't know that was going on. And then it's going to get addressed. But a lot of times, because teachers are in class alone with their kids, and they do have a great deal of flexibility in lesson plans, stuff like this can fly under the radar for quite some time.
Absolutely true. So everybody, keep an eye out for what's going on in your kids' classrooms and make sure you report it. All right, well, let's go ahead and do the next one. In Garland, Texas, at least 2 Muslim men showed up to a local art exhibit which displayed several depictions of the Muslim prophet Muhammad. The Muslims were, of course, pissed off and decided to shoot up the place. One security guard was shot in the ankle and both suspects were gunned down. I guess you just don't pull a gun in Texas where just about everybody else is carrying.
Yeah, this was an interesting case. First of all, I'd like to say is that I have Muslim friends, and I want to say a few things about that. It's important to note that depictions of Muhammad are not forbidden universally across Islam. It's not in the Quran. You will find no text in the Quran saying that. It's a cultural thing among which hadithas have been issued. But for instance, Shia Islam does not prohibit the depiction of Muhammad. They're more in the way that the Jewish faith, handles writing the name of God. You're supposed to be respectful.
Yeah, but I personally don't give shit one about them because I'm not Muslim. So I have no reason not to draw Muhammad. And they have no right to come shoot me because I do something that makes them mad.
Oh, agreed. I'm just saying that, there's been a lot of stuff on the media because unfortunately a lot of media is not real good at analyzing things and they're referring to this as just this one homogeneous whole. I just want to get it out there that you gotta remember that, this is something that is just as much under debate as like a lot of Christian, practices are between various faiths. And I agree because the moment someone starts to use violence to suppress speech, they've lost. End of argument. I don't care what it is. You've lost. If they wanted to say, we're going to boycott Garland, we're going to protest Garland, that's fine. That, the one is an exercise of your money, the other is an exercise of free speech. But some people have argued that, well, this was acceptable or this was justified, and no, it's not.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to say that you've got the social justice warriors out screaming that the exhibit deserved it because they were doing something that offended Muslims. I'm sorry, but shit just doesn't work that way. You can't just say, you can't argue that, yes, somebody has a right to go out and shoot people or whatever because they've been offended. Sorry. These people do things that offend me all the time. Does that give me the right to grab a gun and go shoot somebody?
Yeah, and of course the other thing is that, I can think of many cases back in the 70s where people, used the defense in court that a homosexual man, it was called gay panic defense. There were some other defenses, but the rough argument was by his very existence, he makes me feel afraid. Therefore, Your Honor, that's my defense for blowing his brains out or beating him to death behind a 7-Eleven. Some of those cases were found innocent by that reason, but today we don't allow that, quite rightly. We do not allow the fact that someone else is doing something that offends you, to give you justifiable reason to shoot them. And to be honest, I myself, I think it's important to note because I was on a board where people were discussing this and they were talking about, some of the really ugly depictions of Muhammad, one of him screwing a goat or something like that. But one lawyer pointed out is that there is a difference between something that is forbidden and you just being a jerk. And you're free to be a jerk. We are all free to be jerks. And we are also free to pay the social price of being a jerk. Because you're spouting out racist stuff and your friends decide they don't want to, associate with you, or your manager realizes that you can't keep your mouth shut during the shift and you're really annoying the customers, you will pay the consequences of your free speech, which is they will freely decide to not associate you. That's okay. Because that's part of the consequences of free speech. But to use violence is automatically not. And I want to mention the court has ruled time and time again that you cannot use the justification that this may cause violence to shut someone's speech down. It's on them. It's not
absolutely.
on the talker.
And the one thing people need to remember is there is absolutely, positively no right not to be offended anywhere on the planet. Sorry, it doesn't exist.
The court, the thing is what people miss is that now the Supreme Court's upheld harassment standards at a workplace. But that's because it's a different context. You're in a place you can't leave. It's like a school, some place that you cannot leave. But on the public area, the court has very limited exceptions. I mean, like fighting words can sometimes be used to not make violence acceptable, but can be used as a mitigating factor in a trial. But that exception has been increasingly narrowed as the years go on.
Right, because people need to learn how to control themselves and not just be a bunch of animals.
And usually fighting words tend to be things like, there's been cases like where a person made a direct and violent threat toward a child who was with his father.
That's a threat. There's a difference between making a physical threat, which is completely illegal pretty much everywhere, and just, saying your mother's ugly or something like that.
Right. And in those cases, usually what the court says is that, in some cases you may get a little bit of a benny when they sentence you, but you're not going to be able to use it as an affirmative defense at all. And now, of course, on the other hand, if some guy's bracing you and screaming obscenities, you may go to jail. But there's also always the possibility of an incitement charge. But this does not rise to an incitement charge, because the other factor is this is almost the Platonic definition of what we would call political speech. You're putting out these cartoons for an avowed political reason, and political speech, of course, is the top of the list of things that are protected under American law.
Right. And we have to remember that the group putting on the exhibit, they do define themselves as an anti-Muslim group. But who cares? They've got as much right to free speech to say whatever they want to say as anybody else. The answer to free speech is not violence. If these Muslims were really pissed off, and we know that this whole thing is connected to ISIS, so let's just put that out there right now. But if rational Muslims want to go out and they want to be mad at this, then they can go out and they can draw anything they want. They can put on any kind of exhibition. They can rant up and down in anybody who will give them a forum to do so. But pulling a gun and shooting people, that's not acceptable under any circumstances.
No. And Ken White, he's actually Anyway, Ken White, he's over at Popat. He used to be a federal prosecutor and then a federal defense attorney. It's a good blog. I advise everybody to read it if you want to realize just how much is wrong with some of our law enforcement. But one of the things he said is that, is this group nasty? Is this group racist? Does he think that this lady has anything worthwhile to say? He said, no. Does any of that at any point ever justify attempting to use violence or the law to shut them up? Never. The response if you don't like what somebody's saying is to put more speech out yourself or just ignore them.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the Simpson brothers who perpetuated this attack, they've been previously looked at by the FBI as potential terrorists. Right. And then ISIS came out and issued the statement that says the brothers from the Charlie Hebdo attack did their part. It's time for brothers in the U.S. to do their part.
Right. And of course, ISIS wants that. I mean, I think people need to understand is that all the way back to the various communist insurgencies, one of the things that these groups do not want, they do not want to hear about moderate Muslims. They want to do everything they can to inflame things so that it's impossible to be a moderate, it's impossible to survive as a moderate, because the moment moderates get into power, they're dog meat. There was a reason why Al-Qaeda in Iraq would start taking cell phones away from them, because the majority of people were calling in on them. And what this is that, when you hear ISIS talking about this stuff, they want to inflame things. They want more lone wolf attacks. They want more attacks of fellow travelers, because, not so much for the physical damage they cause, although that, of course, is a benny, but because the more they can get things inflamed, the more they benefit.
Oh, of course.
And, this is a case where, fortunately no one was killed except for the attackers who, to be honest, I could really care less about. It could have turned into a slaughter. And for those upset about the fact they were killed, I will point out that for Muslims in America, had this turned into a slaughter, it would have put Muslims in America in far more danger than what did happen. Because, you had what happened after 9/11. The Sikhs, Muslims, Indians, they all on several occasions fell prey to attack because things were
right.
So
and if I was a Muslim in America, I would be out there leading the charge against this kind of violence. And I haven't seen that yet. I've seen some groups who said, that's not us. But, these are people who need to really get out there and say, these people, the the religious traditions that they value, these people are just wrong. And that's something you never see. And you don't see it when some Christian goes off the reservation and starts shooting shit up. You don't see other Christians coming out going, they're just wrong in their religious beliefs. They'll try desperately to distance themselves from the event, but they're really scared to actually say, these people, this kind of religion, these kinds of religious beliefs, these are just wrong.
Yeah, well, like, for instance, after the Charlie Hebdo attack, I did notice that, American Muslim groups, like the Muslim American Public Affairs Council, they made a speech after that. They said, the caricatures of the Prophet are offensive, but violent assault on the magazine was a complete affront to Islamic principles and values and free speech. So one of the problems, of course, is that I think some of it depends on, can they get their message out there? Because, I'm going to have to say something. I was an Episcopalian. I don't know if I still am. They stopped sending me mail a while ago. But one of the problems that you can sometimes have, and this is a problem with the media, is that you can have a very well-reasoned, press release come out, and it'll generally be 15 pages behind a screaming lunatic with a dead chicken on his head who is saying that the end days are coming.
Yeah, but that doesn't change today because you've got the internet. You can get your message out there. Anybody who has anything to say can get their message out there, and it's not that hard to get the stuff to go viral where a lot of people are reporting on somebody out there saying this is a bad thing. But these people are not willing to decry anything remotely attached to their religion. They're not willing to say, well, the belief that pictures of Muhammad should be offensive or wrong. You don't find anybody saying that.
Right. Well, and one of the issues there is, I've known some that do. I'm not really certain how to work, something like that. I think a lot of it is just to point out is that decrying it helps the religion more than remaining silent. Some groups remain silent. My argument is that the more you talk about it, the more you help and you actually benefit your religion. Because again, what these groups are trying to do is trying to separate things out. ISIS would be happy if tomorrow the U.S. expelled all Muslims. They would say mission accomplished. Because that is what they really want. They don't want any example of a multicultural, multi-ethnic society because it's dead set against what they represent. And I think there should be more speeches on this. I do think that one problem we're seeing here, however, is that the internet's making it a lot easier to radicalize.
Oh, sure, because, it gives people direct access to people all the way around the world where you can find all these really damaged individuals, and you can start filling their head with a bunch of radical bullshit, and they don't care. I mean,
well, and let's face it, also the other thing, and this is true everything from, World of Warcraft clan forums to political forums, it becomes tremendously easy to find yourself talking to your thousands fellow travelers and realize I've got 1,000 people around me. I'm a huge majority, not considering the fact that picking 1,000 people out of like 300 million. You're on the internet because there's nobody else in your city who shares your viewpoints. But the internet brings everybody close together, and I think that is something that's going to be increasingly important in the future years because that's a powerful tool for radicals of any stripe, not just Muslim. I mean, any type of organization that wants to radicalize people, if you can suck them in a place where you can control the narrative, control who they're talking to, you've achieved half the
Yeah, well, I mean, that's something that we've talked to, and I don't want to go too far off base here, but, we've talked about all kinds of groups. I mean, there are sexual perverts, furries, whatever, who they get online and they've never found anybody who has their particular kink in their life in their local area. But they get online and they can form these little communities of people who there may be one per state or one per country or whatever. And all of a sudden they feel justified because holy crap, there's more than just me out there.
Mm-hmm. And, in some cases, of course, this can be a positive thing. There are people who will find other people holding their interest, but, the important thing is to always maintain a balance between what your interests are and your life online and your life offline. The danger comes when someone just spends all their time among this group and they lose any sense of reality. I think might be a realistic appraisal of what the world is.
Yeah, because these people really don't have a grasp on the real world most of the time.
Well, they don't have a grasp, and also, we also need to be aware that some of these groups, ISIS, these terrorist groups, are not stupid. They survive against the most powerful military force on the planet. They're not stupid, and I think that it's important to remember they have some very clever people who are no doubt very well aware of how to work with vulnerable people to draw them into their viewpoint. And that is something, again, this is something parents need to be aware of, friends need to be aware of, just like cults were a big thing in the 1970s, that you were always worried, the kid going to college for the first time. Today, you have to be aware that, this is a capability to literally reach into your own home and indoctrinate somebody that did not exist many years ago. I mean, probably didn't, I doubt it existed as little as 10 years ago. The internet was sufficiently rare and sufficiently peripheral that 10 years ago, I would say it really didn't exist. But today, I mean, there are kids out there who communicate more online than they communicate in
Right. Well, and you also have to keep in mind that a lot of these groups that are trying to radicalize people, these people, they want to maintain an in-group versus an out-group. And they'd want to tell people, well, you can only associate with people in the in-group, and anybody in the out-group, they're the enemy, and you have to ignore them and shun them and never talk to any of them. And that's because they don't want anybody pointing out the absurdity of these beliefs.
Right. And let's face it, that's also, the often, extremists, be they Christian extremists, Islamic extremists, spaghetti monster, extremists of any stripe, their tactics, their worldview, if you could just put a fill in the blank, and they would be identical, because you also see that on many, extreme Christian churches. Never deal with anybody else. The worst thing that can happen to you is you will be cast out of the church and you won't be able to talk to these people.
Yeah, but I mean, the same thing went for like Atheism Plus, where they were trying desperately to find out who didn't fit into their in-group, and they were gonna, stuff them back in the sewers, like, and they set the whole thing up like a safe space for people who should never talk to anybody who disagrees with anything that the group thought.
And of course that's dangerous, because if you're in a safe space where you never talk to anybody, what are you going to do the first time your assumptions are challenged? I mean, in all seriousness, that's one thing that is most disturbing for when people look in these safe spaces, is that if your faith, your belief, your political stance, anything, if it can't survive being challenged, it's not very strong then, is it?
That's really the case, is that in all of these cases, their beliefs really aren't, they don't have strong beliefs. The only way they get strength in the beliefs is by eliminating everything except the beliefs. And that's all they have left.
Yeah. And it's gonna continue. Now, hopefully, like I said, the good news is, of course, that nobody got killed. So we'll see what
nobody important got killed anyway.
I won't say nobody important, except for the fact is that when you go out and you buy and you wear body armor and you have assault rifles, you've chosen your fate. No one can claim, okay, well granted, I've heard a few people claim this was an unjust shooting, but they're not generally people I would trust. Nobody I would bother listen to claims this was anything other than the purest example of self-defense you find. Or to put it differently, as a friend of mine who's a police officer, had they shown up with a couple of signs saying you're going to hell for this and paraded up and down, they never would have been in any danger whatsoever. They were in danger because they brought guns there with the intention of shooting.
And they got what they deserved, and I don't respect anybody who says any differently.
Well, it does make me wonder about their sense of understanding of realism, because it's just kind of, that always strikes me, because I know some people were talking about how they didn't receive a trial, and it's like, well, you don't receive a trial if you're shot in self-defense. This was not a case where they were bundled into a police car, drove out of sight, and then we were later told that they committed suicide by shooting themselves 5 times in the back while throwing themselves down a stairwell. They were shot while attempting to shoot.
And I don't think you can actually find a judge or jury anywhere who looks at the video of this and goes, oh, they didn't really do it. Yeah, they did. They got what they deserved. End of story. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on. Rand Paul has announced that the recent Baltimore riots were a result of absentee fathers in an attempt to appeal to black voters in his upcoming presidential run. Now, while I'm going to agree that the downfall of the family in many ghettos is largely to blame for an uptick in crime, unwed pregnancies, and high school dropout rates, I don't think that's as much of a problem as the failure of ghetto culture, something that lots of politicians just don't want to talk about.
In this case, we know that whatever happened, I mean, it's still under investigation. There's been, I believe, murder murder charges leveled, either murder or manslaughter charges. I forget what they were against the 6 police officers involved. There's a couple of open questions of, the van stopped a couple of times that wasn't on a record. So we don't know what's happening, with that case yet. And we're probably not going to know till it actually gets to trial. I doubt either the defense or the prosecution is going to be, throwing all their evidence around.
Yeah, I mean, I don't pretend to know what happened in Baltimore because I'm not there. I haven't seen the evidence. I'm not part of the investigation. So I'm keeping an open mind, and anybody who is actually guilty of a crime deserves to be punished for that crime. But by the same token, the overwhelming majority of people who are online and screaming that this is about racism and all that crap, they don't know either. They just don't know, nor do they care about the truth. It really has nothing to do with them. They're just using this as fuel for their political diatribes. And the same thing happened in Ferguson and case after case after case where these people really don't know. They couldn't care less what the truth is. They just want to make political points with it.
Well, I mean, and there's a couple of things here that are notably different for I mean, for one thing, Baltimore launched an investigation pretty much right after this happened. I mean, the handling of this case by the authorities was considerably different. So you have that. A lot of the screaming is, I think, unfortunately, because in our modern society, the first person who gets the message out and gets it out loudest, be it, conservative, liberal, whatever, whoever hits the ground first has a very strong advantage. And this militates against sitting back and trying to come up with a more, a fuller understanding before you talk, because your voice will be lost. And that is a problem that is striking our entire
sure. I mean, you've got people
system
coming up with all kinds of really bizarre, stupid crap. I mean, like, Texas Representative Bill Flores claims that Baltimore was due to too many gay marriages. These people are idiots, wow. But they're just, anything bad that happens, they just throw out and go, hey, can I make some kind of political hay out of this? Let's just start throwing stuff out and see what sticks.
Right. And, the problem, one of the things that's been happening is that, well, for one thing, I think I blame search algorithms for this a little bit, because I'm certain at least one of his PR guys was saying, well, if you stick gay marriage next to Baltimore, it's going to trend up real fast. I mean, let's face it, we have a problem today in that, unlike the past, you're looking almost as much at, okay, what is going to make the Google algorithm sit up and take notice as opposed to what's going to make the people
it's all SEO today.
And right. And, I can't blame them in a way, because there's a word for people who say that I will not use SEO techniques. It's called silent, because nobody hears you. But it does represent a problem, and it also represents an issue of a 24-hour news cycle and near instant news that's competing with blogs and such. So they feel that they need to move fast. And unfortunately, especially when you're talking politicians, that's not a good thing. In this case, well, I haven't had a chance to speak to anyone I know back in that area, but a lot of these towns, they've got problems. In some cases, the problems are targeted as much on socioeconomic as anything else, because, to use Ferguson's example, if you're trying to make money by getting people with illegal parking tickets and stuff like that, you don't want to choose the guy who can hire a $250 lawyer to come in and contest the ticket just because he's annoyed. You go after people who can't fight back. But it is a situation where there is a fair amount of hostility towards the police on a lot of areas. I think it's exacerbated by the fact that even today we still don't have, and this is something that should amaze anybody, we still don't have any kind of good national database keeping track of police-related deaths.
Yeah, but the thing is, you've got a lot of people in Baltimore, in Ferguson, all the rest of that, who are out there screaming that the police are evil and all this other stuff. And just a couple of days ago, there was a cop shot in New York by a criminal. He died.
Shot in the head.
And these same people are celebrating that death. These people are saying it's a great thing anytime a cop dies.
Which is a sign that, let's face it, it's a good sign when you're looking at your position, if you're celebrating someone getting killed without knowing the situation. In other words, this wasn't a case of a guy who was shot when he was about to throw a bomb into the puppy factory, but, just a guy doing his job. If you're celebrating his death, you need to really sit back and re-examine yourself, because what you're doing is, you've created an enemy in your own mind that is just as much a religious fantasy as, say,
but these people, They don't care about the deaths. They're using them to push a political agenda. You know, it's like, it's funny that you get so many people out there demanding that police brutality stop, and they should. Absolutely. But they never say anything about these young black men who were criminals and who were being arrested because of their crimes. They don't want to talk about that part because it's not part of their rhetoric. All they want to talk about is, oh, isn't it so horrible that police are actually holding black people accountable for their crimes?
Well, and you know, one of the problems here is that, see, since I've got, you know, family back, mixed race family, things like that. So we have less of a friendly contact. But one thing a lot of these people forget is that even if you're talking about issues with the police, why are you talking about the police? Because the police don't make the laws. The police are not the judges. They're not the prosecutors. A lot of the injustice, and there is injustice, but a lot of the injustice that occurs is, you know, the police are just the ones out there enforcing the law. If a law is unjust, if you feel that it is, well, I'll tell you one thing. You don't want to say, well, the police officer should just ignore the law because, again, some of my family back in the South in the 1920s, police ignored the law all the time. It was just the law that you're not allowed to kill a black man. I mean, you don't want the police, the last people on this planet you want to give the authority to ignore laws they don't like are the people with guns who are charged with enforcing the laws. What you need to do is go up and get that law changed. Either, you know, through a lawsuit, a civil rights lawsuit, through a change, you know, in the legislation. But really, in a lot of cases, when you look at a problem that's happening with police officers, if you look into it deeply at all, which our media doesn't do a lot of times, but if you look at it deeply at all, you find out that they are enforcing policies that were handed down to them from on high. And they're not allowed to not enforce those policies.
But I absolutely agree. If you've got bad cops, and this is another thing that we've kind of been looking at lately, it's funny that when they're pointing out bad cops, they're only talking about white male cops. Female cops, you know, if there's ever a case where there's a female cop involved that did something wrong, they don't talk about that. Black cops, they will make every excuse in the book to justify why that guy was able to do what he was able to do. If these people are breaking the law, these people absolutely positively deserve to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, no matter what. The whole idea that, hey, we're just going to pick and choose some people based on a political ideology, that's just ridiculous.
Right. And, you know, this gets again back to the problem is that I think the first solution to this, possibly the best solution, to start with, is to develop a national database for all these issues. Corruption, accusations, use of force. Because at this point, you cannot even seriously, for instance, in the case of Baltimore, you cannot even really seriously determine whether this is a representation of just an error, if it's practice. I mean, there are so many different ways to keep track out there. And, you know, for God's sake, we're a nation that keeps track of the number of kids who get sick due to peanut allergies. And you're telling me that we can't keep track of all these issues on a national basis so we have some damn clue what's going on
but these
a
people
national
don't care.
Statistical basis?
That's the thing. No, they don't care about the statistics. They don't care about anything. They just want to keep riling people up, so they're going to go out and burn down stores and steal things, and they can pretend that it's some big, huge thing that it really isn't.
Well, yeah, and of course other people don't care because, well, they consider it too expensive because God help us if our government ever spend money on useful. And yeah, it's a problem that both sides, because let's face it, another factor is there's a lot of people in charge that don't want anything like that going on, because if you do get a national system, a lot of excuses go away on both sides, which is why it's not happened yet, because both sides have a very pragmatic interest in not creating
but the government, like, they're pushing right now for cameras for cops. And the people who don't want the cameras for cops, I mean, they sit around and say, oh yeah, we should do that, but they don't realize that those cameras for those cops are going to put a lot of them away. They're going to put a lot of rioters away, people who are committing crimes away, et cetera, and they don't want that. They don't want anything like that.
Which, yeah, well, that's one of the arguments I argue for cameras for cops. Because, see, the thing is that whether the question isn't if someone's going to be put away. The question is are they going to be put away justly? Because, you know, there is no world in which we're not going to have criminals. So having a camera, yeah, it's going to see people put away. It's going to protect cops. It's going to protect, the people they arrest. And it's going to allow us to really damn quickly start separating out the people who should be police officers from the people who shouldn't be police officers. And that to my mind,
it's fine for me too. I want that to happen, but let's be honest. These people who are really pushing for that kind of thing, who are out there screaming and, burning things down, those are not the people who want the cops to have cameras.
Well, some of them are. Yeah, and there's another factor we also got to remember. I mean, I remember that there were some demonstrations in LA that, not the 92 riots. They were a little bit after that. And the demonstrations itself was peaceful, and then as dark started to fall, you had all sorts of people come out of the woodwork who had not been in the primary demonstration. I think it's also important to recognize that a lot of these demonstrators are engaging their First Amendment rights, and then we got a lot of other ones who are using this as an excuse. And I would say that legitimate demonstrators should be as against this as anyone else, because to be honest, right now the story quickly kind of went away from the fact that the guy had died in the presence of 6 cops to the fact that, oh my God, people are burning buildings down. If you are a demonstrator, if you are demonstrating against what you see as government overreach, and there are a lot of people who are there nonviolently demonstrating, you want the SOBs burning things down to be locked up. Because they, once again, just like we said with the guys who were shooting up the Muhammad thing, people who engage in violent rioting harm whatever message there was to begin with, because the news media will, if you give them 99 shots out of 100, they will choose 99 times to focus on a burning building rather than the guy giving a speech. Because a burning building puts seats in the asses. Or put seats in the asses. Now that's awful uncomfortable. Puts asses in the seats when you're watching this. So yeah, and I would like to see cameras. Now I will make a caveat. Cops make cruel jokes. I remember one police officer, who was doing a song when they were coming to notify a family. He said, he was singing your son is dead, he drank too much and now he's dead. And the guy walking past him, they didn't know it, but the guy was the kid's father. Now, it's a sad story, but it's an important story, is that police officers, teachers, I knew one teacher of special ed kids who would come in and throw a chair and scream about the, little shit she had to teach, and then she would go out and be a perfectly nice teacher to them. Wonderful woman, but you've got to have that escape valve. I mean, it's like a boiler. If you can't do that, you'll blow up. You'll blow your brains out. You'll quit. You'll become a nasty person, because let's face it, in Texas, there was a case on, December 25th where a guy got angry at his kid and dunked his kid's hands up to their elbows in boiling water. That's what a police officer got to see on his Christmas Eve before he went home to his kids. So if we're going to have cameras, and especially if they're always on duty, people have got to understand that cops saying stuff, teachers saying stuff, even horrible stuff that makes you wonder about the humanity of this individual is not something you should get upset about, as long as it doesn't, leach over into the way they interact with the public. In fact, it may be their defense mechanism.
But we all know that if that kind of stuff got out, that all these people who are pushing for cop hate and all that, that's the first thing that they'd be airing. They don't care.
Which is a problem. I mean, this is a factor, because in all seriousness, I think people need to remember, and yes, there have been bad cops out there. There are. A lot of them started out as good cops. They got bad, and when they did get bad, you need to remember the fact that for a lot of us, a cop's average day might have a lot of us going to a psychoanalyst for the rest of our lives. Because yes, we're not as violent as we used to, but things are a lot better now. But still, police officers do see really horrific stuff, probably more horrific stuff than soldiers see, because they can get 20 years of this being on the street as opposed to time in theater. And one of the issues is this getting a little far afield, so I'll stop after this, is that right now there's still not been a lot of good work done about post-traumatic stress.
Yeah, that thing.
Disorder. Yes. PTSD thing. Yes, that thing. As it applies to police officers, firefighters, paramedics, all these other groups, for the simple reason is that a lot of them do not want to run the risk of getting that on their jacket, because they're afraid that, okay, if it looks I went to saw a shrink, there's every chance that I might find out that my promotions or possibly even my employment may be at danger. And that's something we need to work on, because I think in a lot of cases, especially, some of these problems that you see with police officers may actually be untreated PTSD. I mean, and that's another factor I'd like to mention to anybody out there. If you feel like mouthing off to a police officer, I'm not going to say that they're all evil people, because they're not. However, note that you have no idea if that police officer just stopped you after a boring day, or stopped you after he almost got killed, or stopped you after he saw something really, really horrible in life. that's something that also needs to be taken into account when you're talking about any kind of emergency services.
Yeah, but unfortunately those people usually don't care about that stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's the point that's the point of having a legal way, a political way of handling this, is that you damp out what those want. You take both sides and you come to a reasonable conclusion of what works best. Remembering that what works best is never going to work entirely well.
All right, so we want to do the last story?
The last story, yes. U.S. states take aim at the NSA. Oh, yes. Well, the NSA they have been bad boys recently. And part of that is that it's important to remember that the NSA is not supposed to be able to spy on American citizens. Very important fact. There's an American citizen is supposed to be protected by a number of constitutional rights, and neither the NSA or the CIA are supposed to be have any interaction with what we consider domestic law enforcement. Anyone care to mention how much that's been honored? And the answer is not at all. I mean, there has been a tremendous amount of overlap between law enforcement, and we're starting to see states bucking back against it. Texas is passing a Fourth Amendment a Protection Act. California passed what's a Fourth Amendment Protection Act, prohibits the state from providing support to a federal agency to collect electronically stored information or metadata of any person if that state has actual knowledge the request constitutes an illegal or unconstitutional collection. Okay, a couple of things. First of all, that's kind of a non sequitur because the state is already free to refuse an illegal request. You can't just wander into a state hall of records and say, I want to pull confidential records for no good reason. On the other hand, if there is ever a law that is passed like the Patriot Act, a state can't ban it because the supremacy clause comes into effect. That, federal laws will always override state laws unless you manage to get them declared unconstitutional, which, sad to say, I don't think there's any chance.
Yeah, well, I mean, right now there's 16 states that refuse to provide information to any federal agency that is trying to gather unconstitutional evidence. And I'm kind of looking at this going, now wait, isn't that how the whole gay marriage movement started? How long is it going to be until we start having, 37 states are now refusing to deal with the NSA?
Well, and like I said, the biggest problem, of course, is that if the NSA wants to press it, they can. Of course, the question I have is, how much collection is going on under the table? Because just, with the Snowden, I think it was Snowden and some of the WikiLeaks revelation, when they found out that what was happening is that the DEA was using NSA information to build, court cases. But they were using, what was called parallel construction, where the NSA would give them the information and then they would go back and falsify records trying to create a paper trail as if the DEA had done the whole investigation itself.
Yeah.
Completely illegal, just completely illegal. And it really is a issue given how good electronic collection of information.
Yeah, well, I think it was actually funny that a lot of states are now saying, we can't actually stop you from doing what you're doing, but we can turn off your electricity and turn off your water and stop allowing you to actually exist. Right. You want to have computers that are out there searching through people's emails? How is that going to work when you have no power?
And, of course, if that comes to a fight, the fact of the matter is that the courts will probably rule that no, the supremacy clause requires you to allow these government agencies to act. I mean, there's been a couple of cases where they've tried this for other things, and generally the argument is that's getting too intrusive. But the good thing about that is that would, of course, require the federal government to take legal action, which is going to be spread all over the news. And I think that is, as much as anything, the goal of these laws is to force this, what has been kind of a quiet and covert activity, out into the open. And what's interesting is the fact of the matter is that these states are all over the board politically. You've got liberal states like California, you've got conservative states like Texas, all, uniting on this one issue, which I think is a good thing. I mean, it's an example of a case of a very bipartisan grassroots consensus that there have to be some limits.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got no problem if they have actual legitimate surveillance that they're doing, but that kind of stuff you really should be able to get a warrant from a judge. And the NSA and other government groups have just decided they don't have to bother with following the law.
No. And in many cases, they have broken a number of laws. I mean, we've had cases of kidnapping, we've had, in this case, probably violation of the Healthcare Privacy Acts. And of course, this can have a major impact on your life. I mean, if you're a businessman who has to travel and you one day find out you just ended up on the no-fly list, Well, as I recall, there was actually the government attempted to argue in one case. I don't have it, and I don't know if I can find this, but they attempted to argue in one case that you can always get on a ship. If you're not allowed to fly, you can find a tramp freighter to go to Europe. And, that just gets into an area of so transparently ridiculous that what they're trying to say is that if you can somehow travel any way, shape, or form, we're not responsible for any level of inconvenience.
Yeah, but they don't care. That's the problem. Because they can get away with it because they're the government and nobody, I mean, I've got no idea why the country isn't like up in arms over such abuses of power, but I guess people are just stupid and lazy and totally out of touch with the real world.
Well, actually, I would say there's a couple of reasons. Number one, it's taken a while. In a way, the fact that the Obama administration took the Bush administration policies and ran with them is a good thing, because for a while there was a feeling that this was a partisan issue. Now I think people are increasingly seeing it's not a partisan issue. Republicans and Democrats alike should agree that there need to be limits on what rights the government has to take a look at your records, especially without a warrant. The other factor is that I'm sad to say a lot of people really do believe this claim that, if only we'd been able to do this before 9/11, 9/11 would never happen, and we're protecting you from the evil terrorists. Just give us access to all your most closely held secrets. And that, of course, was not the case. The information needed to stop 9/11 was available before 9/11. It just wasn't put together correctly. And I kind of wonder how gathering vastly larger amounts of data will make the situation better if the problem with 9/11 was you couldn't figure out what to do with the data you already had. And of course the other problem is ignoring all this. Really seriously, my stance is that we do not have to argue a right for ourselves to be private. I don't have to say word one in defense of my right to have the stuff on my computer in my house private. The government has to come up with a legitimate and justifiable reason why they need to have access to it. And
but the government doesn't care. That's the problem. Is because it's much easier for them to say, well, what the hell, we're going to do what we want to do and we're going to, solve crimes or whatever. And then we're going to point to those few instances we can come up with and say, see, what we're doing actually works. Ignoring the millions of cases where it just doesn't mean anything.
Right, and of course a lot of this is that so if something does happen, you can sit down and say, see, not my fault, not my fault, not my fault. We got everything, which is a rather foolish way to do it, but sadly it's kind of par for the course in today's Washington. Covering your ass, making certain that, alright, we gathered all this ton of information. And, another issue with this is, of course, we know about this because of Snowden and the WikiLeaks. Other people just kind of walked out of the NSA headquarters with a ton of information they weren't supposed to have access to. And that presents another problem. I mean, for instance, if you happen to have, a reading habit that your family may not agree with, or material that could be used to blackmail you, like, you're a local pastor who is also really into playing My Little Pony, Friendship is Erotic with your best friends down at the club. The fact of the matter is that by gathering all this information, the government is one data breach away from opening huge numbers of people to severe damage. And we know that it's a danger because the only reason we know about all this stuff the NSA was doing is, again, they had a guy just kind of stroll out with a ton of information.
The thing, and this is the thing that I always think is just bizarre about Snowden, is he comes out, he releases information that shows that the government is violating the law, and the government, instead of going, holy crap, we've got people out there who are off the reservation, they start going, that guy over there is a traitor.
Yeah, well, that's the problem because, for one thing, again, both the Bush and the Obama administration have been very nasty when it comes to whistleblowers. The Obama more than the Bush administration, I'm forced to say. And it's a case where people are not willing to understand that, damaging information may have been released, although they've been very silent on precisely what that damaging information was, but it doesn't change the fact that if the police are looking into everybody's house without a warrant, it doesn't matter if they stop some criminals. The point is, they're looking at everybody's house without a warrant. And this is a case with this thing with the NSA. Do they feel it's necessary? Then come out and try to pass a law in front of the Senate and the Congress and the American people, that will have a conversation and will expose everybody to the full weight of public criticism if the public doesn't like it. Don't try to do this secret stuff where you're kind of smirking as you're saying, well, we're not.
Yeah, but you got to remember
evidence.
that it wasn't that many years ago where the NSA didn't even officially exist. No such agency. I'm sure that they've been doing this crap for a long time.
Oh, I'm certain they have. It's the practice of it. I mean, and the problem we of course have right now is that computers are allowing such a tremendous boost in data processing. I mean, again, the technology that Google uses, never mind anybody else. Joseph Stalin would cheerfully slit his mother's throat for what Google uses to analyze, people. And I'm certain the NSA has just as good or if not better software. We're getting to the point where, complex voice recognition. If any of you have ever used Google, the Google Voice to ask a question or use Siri, you're talking incredible explosions over the past decades. Facial recognition. We are really getting close to the point where a total surveillance state not only becomes possible, but becomes economically viable. And it's important to start this debate right now because we don't want to go like the frog in the cauldron where the frog never notices.
But unfortunately, a lot of people either don't care or the government doesn't care if the people care.
Well, yeah. Well, one problem is we have a ton of voters who vote Republican because the Democrats are the devil, or vote Democrat because the Republicans are the devil, and they will seriously not even really bother to examine the party stances. They are a reliable vote. So why should
but you know that you're never going to hold either party accountable because the American memory is like 32 seconds.
Right. Well, that's the other problem. I mean, you're going to look at it, I think it was, Lyndon Johnson that said I could walk on water on the mall and the newspaper would say I don't know how to swim. That, that's a problem because our political memory is so short that it is very difficult to address situations that have been growing over several administrations on both sides of the aisle. And so people just kind of ignore it. And unfortunately, I blame again a lot of the developments on the internet, which are increasingly prizing, Twitter style gotcha claims.
Yeah, but this stuff has been going on for
serious
decades.
Discourse.
I mean, let's be honest. Way back when, the first president who ever got televised, they had to make sure that, it's somebody who looks good because that's the only thing people are going to vote for. People don't vote for ideas. People don't vote for positions. They vote for whoever looks better or who gives the best soundbite on the internet. Right.
Well, the problem, of course, is that, again, it gets to the short memory, the short time span, because laying out a good position. I mean, I don't care if you're a liberal or a conservative. You want to lay out a good economic plan for America by your own lights. I mean, I'm not saying you have to agree with it, but it's not something that's going to fit in a 5-minute soundbite. Because it's a damn complex issue. And complex issues don't really admit themselves to simple solutions, which is why, most of our politicians don't go for them. Like for instance, back, I think it was Bush 43 who, was surprised at the cost of a quart of milk. And he was pilloried for that. And yet, it's kind of an unjust claim because seriously, the man has been rich all of his life. Sorry Americans, rich people don't go out and buy their own milk. Their time is worth more than that. The president does not go out and buy a quart of milk because the president doesn't have enough hours in the day to do his normal damn job. But people latched onto that. It's like some people latched onto the fact that there was an interview where President Obama mentioned he enjoyed the fact that he didn't have to make any choices about dinner. That, dinner was always just kind of laid out for him by the staff. And some people were going, oh, well, that's lazy. No, it's not lazy. It's the president saying that I make choices all the damn day that could get people killed. I kind of enjoy the novelty of just sitting down and,
there was a story
not having to worry
not too
about
long ago where Gwyneth Paltrow, she was trying to prove that, food stamps didn't provide you very much. And so she went out and she took the money from food stamps and she went out to some Whole Foods grocery upper end, super expensive place. And she was going, see, it doesn't buy much because you're not buying things where anybody who would have food stamps would actually go, you moron.
You go to the cheap places where you get a ton of stuff, or you buy the stuff that is, one day before its expiration date because they'll always give you the expiration date, but there's always about a week after that where it's still going to be good. Everyone I've known who's ever been on food stamps, they are demons at finding places that are, cheap. And, this is a problem. I mean, I know a few friends that they say that we're shopping cheaply. We're waiting for the sale.
Yeah, that's not a sale, dude. You gotta go find yourself some,
that's not a sale.
Back alley grocery store.
You clip coupons and stuff like that. But yeah, it is a problem. It is easy to cherry pick data if you want to look at it. And of course, a lot of people, it's also hurt by the fact that every political group out there has people who specialize in cherry-picking data, and people who make a lot more money than we make, dedicated solely to figuring out what's going to happen.
Let's figure out how to lie the most effectively.
Which, if you take anything away from this, if you want to think,
yep, that's true. I'll agree with you there.
The devil, you're correct.
All right, well, we should probably go do the main event because we're running long again.
We always run long. It is.
We always do.
I don't know why we're running long, but.
This is the main event.
Last week, we talked about the gay marriage issue in light of the civil court finally taking a look at the legality of gay marriage nationwide. However, it's not just gay marriage that some groups oppose. It's all marriage. There are some groups of libertarians in particular who are staunchly opposed to any kind of government-sanctioned marriage, preferring to think that it should either be an entirely religious thing or a thing between two or more people, and the government should have absolutely no part in it. I think this is complete bullshit, and I'm more than happy to tell you why.
I would love to see the political fallout of such a decision in the same way I would love to be about 10 feet downwind from the Hiroshima detonation, because...
Yeah, I think it's hysterical that a lot of the people who really push this, a lot of the libertarian types who push it, they're all married. Guys, if marriage as a state-run institution is so horrible, why are you married, morons?
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems to ask here is, first of all, marriage in law, it's already more or less secular in law in the sense that I don't care what I call myself, or if I'm priest, grand poobah, pope. If I don't have a license from the state, I ain't married. And I could be, they can't withhold that license based on your religion. So it's already secular in that sense. But I think the problem they miss is that over the years, there have been so many rights accruing to the status of being married, either rights defined by law or rights that have just become set in custom, that if you were to try to get rid of marriage... Yeah,
it's in society's best interest to encourage marriage. It doesn't matter if it's gay marriage, it doesn't matter if it's straight marriage. The government, as society's legislative arm, they ought to also encourage marriage by providing benefits to those who are married. I mean, the fact is that marriage is better for society than people who are not married. And that's something these people just don't understand.
Marriage produces ideally a supportive environment. I have to confess I'm not married, but the factor is that, a good marriage can provide a stable environment for both partners, help create community bonds. And again, the fact is that there's also a claim, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, I'd like to point out one thing. The reason why gay marriage is such a non-issue is that homosexual marriage, all that means is you just pencil out a couple of words in the legal code and pencil in, male or female. It doesn't require any change.
Yeah, well, I went ahead and I put together sort of a little list of all the things, the reasons why marriage is actually important in human society. Marriage betters society by providing stability for raising children and building communities. Married couples tend to have more disposable income to spend, and that gets spent in the local community. They tend to be homeowners at a much higher rate than those that are not married. In general, married couples are healthier. They live longer. Married mothers have a lower incidence of depression than single mothers. Married men and women are better off financially on average. Children in married relationships are much less prone to both physical and sexual abuse than those of single mothers, especially where you have a non-parental male living in the household. The children are much, much more likely to remain in school. They have fewer emotional problems. They're more likely to earn four-year college degrees. Boys that come from homes where the parents are married are less likely to engage in criminal behavior. Married women are less likely to be victims of violence, and married men are less likely to engage in violent behavior against their wives. And the list goes on and on and on and on. So to say that marriage doesn't matter, or that what the fuck, we should just get rid of marriage and then people should just live together, that's goddamn stupid because it doesn't fit with the actual evidence.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at some of the studies, one of the greatest damaging factors about African American households was the low incidence of married couples. And unfortunately, this cohabitation is not the same thing. I mean, it really isn't. It doesn't come with the same level of commitment. It doesn't come with the same level of legal protection. You can be a devoted, common law, husband of a woman, but if she should happen to die in a lot of states, you're out of luck if you want to get custody of the child. And as for raising children, yeah, I mean, you've had 2 children. I have a goddaughter. And the thing is that even with 2 people, It can get awfully tiring. I cannot imagine how a single mother who manages to raise a child at all has my tremendous and unreserved
assuming she does a good job of it, which most of the time is not the case.
Assuming much of the time it is not the case. But of course the problem is that when people ask why aren't they doing a good job, here's the thing. You have a child. A child is a full-time job.
But these are people who are defending single motherhood, who are saying that, she should never have to have a man in her life. All she's got is a sperm donor, and she should be able to, work full-time, raise a child, be involved in the child's life, school, doing homework, all this other stuff. And it's like, I'm sorry, but there just aren't enough hours in the day for one person, be it a man or a woman, to do all that stuff and do it successfully.
Yeah, find someone. If you want to marry a woman, fine. You want to marry a man. But the thing is that in all seriousness, even the people who have managed to do a relatively good job at it, you'll hear in their lives that, exhaustion and depression is a constant companion of them because they can't be around for a lot of their child. When their child's doing the dance at the end of school, no, they're having to work an extra shift to make money because they're a single parent, mother or father, they're a single parent. And in all too many cases, that means they're having to work a job, grab as much overtime as they can to help pay for their child. And that overtime comes out of the time that they could spend with their child. 2 parents is, male, female, male, doesn't matter the combination. 2 parents are, in my opinion, an unabashed case of superiority to a single parent. Again, this isn't a moral, I'm not speaking of this from any kind of moral point of view. This is just hours in the day and how can you have enough time?
Yeah, well, I mean, unfortunately, I think we've been handling marriage the wrong way in America for about 50 years now. We've made marriage far too easy to get into and far, far too easy to get out of.
Well, the problem, getting into and out of marriage, in California was actually the first place to come up with the idea of the no-fault divorce. That was because, in the years after the gold rush, obviously you had many cases of abandonment. Some of them voluntary, some of them the guy goes off and then dies or something or whatever. But because of the way the law worked at the time, divorce could only be granted for a very narrow series of causes. So they started expanding abandonment and then they turned it into, okay, well, we can get a no-fault divorce. I'm of 2 minds about this. On the one hand, I agree that in some cases some people enter into marriage too casually. On the other hand, I'm not entirely certain if it's good for a child if you have a pair of parents who really don't want to be with each other, in the house feeling trapped. That's a case where I think it's better to really focus on making certain people understand
but unfortunately,
what a commitment
especially
marriage
since
is
we're
before they
sort of
enter
in the
into
Hollywood
it.
area, that kind of crap happens in Hollywood all the time where it's like, oh yeah, I just met you 15 minutes ago. Oh, yeah. Let's get married. Tomorrow we'll get divorced because it really doesn't make any damn bit of difference. Seriously, this is just ridiculous. Well, it ought to be really, really hard to get out of a marriage. Just like it ought to be really hard to get into one. That's why there needs to be a severe financial entanglement of 2 people. So when you decide to call it quits, it needs to be really serious before you're willing to go, holy crap, it's going to be a financial nightmare to go through this.
To untangle. Well, one of the things is, of course, Hollywood is a case where, I think one problem is Hollywood is not representative of most single mothers. I know that occasionally they talk about single mothers in Hollywood, but if you're talking about someone who is wealthy, who is already independently wealthy, that produces an entirely different set of circumstances than somebody who is having to either work at a lower class or even a middle class job. Someone who is independently wealthy can afford to take weeks off with their kid.
Yeah, but the fact is,
most people can't do that.
Kids who are raised in single parent households, it doesn't matter how, it has nothing to do with economic success. They perform more poorly than kids who are raised in 2-parent households. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about a Hollywood single parent who's making $1 billion or a 2-parent household that's scraping to get by. The kids do better with the 2 parents than they do with the 1.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that is
and they do better
because,
when the parents are married than when the parents are just living together. The marriage matters to the success of the children.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also a sense of seriousness about it, and stability. You're right. There is a strong sense of stability. And, that is one reason why I think this idea of making everything a contract. I mean, many libertarians like the idea that, hey, everything's a contract. I'll sign a 5-year contract to be married. And I think that's a bad idea because it creates a sense that it can be dissolved just as casually as a contract. And this is one area where, okay, don't explode. But I think in some respects, the churches, some of the Christian ideology, the idea of one flesh, of trying to really make a tremendous amount of formalization of this marriage, making it an incredibly serious affair, is a good idea. People, this is one problem I have when I see people getting married by a guy dressed as a bozo clown. You have some of these marriages that look almost like sideshows.
Seriously, the biggest reasons for divorce, as far as I'm really concerned, is serious immaturity on the basis of these people. I mean, some of the biggest reasons I see for divorce, like lack of communication, unrealistic expectations, and the inability to compromise. This is shit that you need to work out long before you ever get married.
I think there's a good argument for extended periods of being engaged. Because engagement was kind of supposed to be this test run, is that, okay, we're not married, but we are in a much closer relationship than friendship. Let's see if we can work this. And, now, of course, in the past, the main protector of marriage was the utter social stigma, especially applied to divorcees, especially divorced women. And we don't have that now, but I think, a strengthening of the idea that you need to be as certain as you can be. Now, there will always be cases where there's a marriage and for whatever reason, it just becomes impossible work. I don't think making marriage a serious commitment necessitates us saying that if you happen to be trapped in a marriage that you are utterly miserable in and you have tried to make it work over years and it's not just working.
And nobody's saying that though, but as you said, social standards have gone through the floor in the past 20 or 30 years. We used to have this thing in society called shame. Nobody's heard of that anymore, but people used to follow social norms because they were ashamed not to. It wasn't that they couldn't get out of a marriage. It was that they had made a commitment, quote unquote, before man and God, that they were going to make this work. And God damn it, they were going to do absolutely positively everything they could to make it work. Today, that's gone. That's why you've got out of wedlock childbirth that is at absurd levels because nobody is ashamed of anything.
Well, one of the problems, of course, is that shame in those eras was backed up by very strong social sanction. I mean, it wasn't just shame; it's that you would pay a real financial and cultural price. Today, I'm not certain about.
If you're looking in the black community, 72%. If you're looking in, and it varies, but it's up around 40 to 50% in a lot of communities.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's. Yeah,
and these are not people who they were married and got a divorce. These are people who have never been married, who had no interest in being married, who went out, found a guy, never had any relation with them. Their kids have never even met their father. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, and this, of course, is a scourge that's been addressed. I mean, I know, for instance, in the black community, a large number of African American leaders have really done their best to address this. It's a difficult issue because it's also a self-perpetuating issue. Is that if a child who has never experienced a two-parent family is much more likely to him or herself.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the black community,
create a single-parent household.
I can give them a little bit of, I don't want to say credit because I can't give them any credit, but I can forgive a little bit of it because back in the 60s and 70s, in order to get any kind of welfare, the state refused to allow men to be part of the family. So, you'd have somebody, you'd have the government knocking on the front door and the man running out the back door because if he didn't, then he'd actually have to provide for his family. But that was 40 freaking years ago. What's wrong with you people?
Well, I mean, part of it is, and you got to remember, it goes back even further back then to, I would say, probably all the way to the antebellum. But unfortunately, customs form that can be a little difficult to break. In some areas, there's been attempts to form support organizations. I mean, because let's face it, another problem with single-parent households, white, black, Indian, I know Native Americans have a high percentage. It's generally highly correlated with poverty. But one other problem you have with single-parent households is you also often miss a lot of the supporting family. I mean, one advantage of having a dual-parent household is not simply the parents, it's often the grandparents and the cousins and the uncles, and everyone who can surround and actually form a community around your family. Now, in part, that's also been harmed by this new society we have, which is an incredibly mobile society. I mean, people no longer live in the same neighborhood where the last 5 generations have lived. But see, that's another problem, is that once you break the chain, once you start having single-parent families, you run into a problem is that you're losing a lot more of that support network, and it doesn't take too many generations to go by before the people
that's why you've got like Hillary going, it takes a village to raise a child, because you've already killed most of the family that used to do it.
Right. And of course, one thing would be, you could incentivize marriage by various, we already have, fairly decent tax breaks for marriage, but you could also incentivize marriage by other methods. But again, to get back to the libertarian argument, you shouldn't have a concept of marriage. I mean, that's just, I can't think of anything more devastating, because to be honest, again, you'll speak to African American, Native American leaders. They will all state, if you ask them, well, what's one of the most devastating things that struck the community? They'll generally state this proliferation of out of wedlock birth and single parent families. And because you're right, it just is not, and unfortunately what's happening now is even among other groups that didn't used to be hit out of wedlock births quite to the same degree, we're starting to see a rise in them there. I know that oh God, I forget his name. He was one of the first senators that brought this up, but, it's poor white communities, poor, Anglo-white. It's always hard to get the, definition right, but they are experiencing a rising number of out of wedlock, births, single parent households. And it is having the same effect it's having everywhere else, because you can't do as good a job.
Yeah. And unfortunately, like I said before, if you start bringing in other people just to fill out the household, you tend to get all kinds of abuse, sexual, physical, etc. And it's not it's not just a little bit. It's at like multiple times the rate that the rate that kids in married parental relationships have.
And even if you don't have that, serial girlfriends or serial boyfriends often run into the same problem. I was a substitute teacher. I can tell you, having 5 substitute teachers in a year in a class is a good way to make certain that class learns absolutely nothing. And the same thing happens because, kids aren't just going to give their loyalty. So by the time they start to know the guy or the girl, she's gone and someone else is back, and the whole process happens again. And again, that produces the negative impact that when that child becomes an adult, they will be much more likely to adopt a single-parent household, because that is the model they've seen. And it is unfortunate. I mean, marriage should be encouraged. In fact, that's one of the things that's always angered me so much about a lot of the anti-gay rights activists. You have people who are struggling for the right to have their marriages recognized. This should be encouraged.
No, I mean, not only should it be encouraged, but it actually has to be a government program. It has to be something that comes from the government. Like we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, if your loved one gets run over by a bus and is in the hospital, the only thing that's really going to get you in there is going to be marriage. It doesn't make a difference if you've signed contracts, if you've signed powers of attorney. All of those things can be pushed away by the hospitals. The only thing that actually works is marriage. So there isn't really any kind of substitute.
Right. And marriage will be your absolute protection from some other thing. I mean, and the most importantly is that, it provides a good deal of social and emotional support too. And just the idea that you shouldn't be allowed to marry. Like, I mean, I think there was,
I'm sure there's a lot
Florida
of states
that tried to outlaw gay couples adopting. Yeah. I mean, but I would have no problem with a gay couple adopting. I would have severe concerns about a single parent adopting.
Right. I mean, I don't really like the idea of single parents adopting at all anyway, for that reason.
In most cases, to be honest, it's because the state really, in some cases, feels that, look, we need to find a child at home. And in a perfect world, they would probably go to, dual parent households. It's not a perfect world. And I'm not saying that it can't work, but I'm saying that it's far more likely to work with a married couple, be they hetero or homosexual. Because, again, it just gets back to the fact is that, to use the simplest argument, when one person is to their wits' end with a little brat who has decided that his personal mission in life today will be to drive father and or mother completely insane, you can hand them off to the other parent and say, look, I gotta go take a walk. I'm about to yell. I'm about to do something I don't want to do. I need to take a walk and calm down. And you cannot do that in a single parent household. And, that I think, in a nutshell is one of the biggest problems with a single parent household is that, a married household, mom and or dad can always say, okay, honey, you go take a walk, you go watch a show.
And also the fact that when you have two married parents and one of them says, I gotta take a break, and the other one isn't actually married to you, even if they are the parent of the child, there's nothing really stopping them from going, screw it, I'm gonna take off too.
Yeah, there is that. You get that in casual. And of course, legally, if there is no legal relationship, and your boyfriend takes the kid out and something happens, God forbid, and I'm not even talking about something that the boyfriend and or girlfriend is responsible for. Maybe you take them out to the skate park and the kid decides to see, okay, well, I've been told that my face can defeat the concrete if I am good and true. When they get to the hospital is going to want to know, okay, well, sir, what's your relationship with this child? Yeah, I'm the boyfriend of her mom. Slam. The walls come down. The hospital is not legally allowed to talk to you about that child's case then. I mean, they are not simply not wanting to talk to you about the child's, case. They are legally not allowed to talk to you. Depending on how, they want to be about it, they may not even allow you into the child's room. Because you have no legal relationship.
It's just sad. The whole thing is just sad. And it's worse to watch people who not only are going, it's really hard when they're going, all right, I think that these people need to be legally equivalent, talking about gays and lesbians. These people need to have legal equivalent rights to straight people. And then to turn around and say, yeah, but I don't think that straight people should have any rights in this area either.
Well, I think the problem is that seriously, we just need to allow marriage, because again, it's literally making a few notations in the relevant law codes, maybe about, 10 words total, and you're done. And you can have marriage for gays, for heterosexuals, without harming the institute of marriage by strengthening it. That's,
I do too, but,
I don't
the religious,
think marriage is done away with.
They've got different weird arguments.
Yeah. Well, you got the libertarians on the one end and the religious on the other. Now, I will say one thing. People always bring up polygamy in these discussions, and I will say one thing. Polygamy legally is different. Because polygamy would recognizing polygamy would raise a lot of legal questions. I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but it would be far more than just making a few notations in the code surrounding marriage. It would require a lot of complex work and questioning.
Right. I mean, by definition, marriage
usually a binary relationship
is between two people. So you have children. Well, that's not that hard to figure out, who gets custody. You have to worry about the financial matters. That's not too hard to figure out. But when you've got a situation where you got two people, and then a third person comes in, and then one of the two people leaves, and then a third person comes in, and then other people, trying to figure out who is in relation to who and who has rights about what, that's a disaster waiting to happen. I don't have anything against it, but you gotta figure that shit out before we legalize it.
Right, and of course there's the other problem. Let's face it, in America, people practicing polygamy has been very highly linked to religious groups that are, to put it mildly, not nice when it comes to their treatment of women. I mean, you've got some of the splinter, cults that split off from the Mormon church. That,
sister wives.
Have very ugly, social patterns surrounding that. And also throwing out 15-year-old boys because they'll compete for marriage. I mean, that's another issue, and that's one reason I think that polygamy is probably going to remain, not recognized for a good long time, because in all seriousness, it has had a far higher number of problematic issues.
Right, I agree. I mean, like I said, I'm okay with it as long as we figure out all of these legal and social issues. Until we do, there's no chance in hell that it's getting legalized, and it shouldn't, because the same thing, there are no real problems by adding gay marriage to what we already have. There's no real difference between any of it. With polygamy, that's a different issue entirely.
No. There would be many real differences. I mean, it would be one of the things, that, short of opening a gladiatorial arena for everybody to get in and resolve their differences, I don't really know how it would be handled. But no, yeah, I mean, on both sides of this issue, marriage should be for both hetero and homosexual people. Let's not abolish it.
Well, do we have anything else to do for the week?
Not that I can think of. In the next couple of weeks, we're coming up. I think there may be a few things coming up regarding, Iran in the next couple of weeks, but, nothing have I heard about that.
Oh, you've missed some of the recent stuff
that might be next
where Iran captured a U.S. ship and now they're chasing U.S. ships around the Gulf.
Oh yeah. Well, one of the problems is what they're claiming is that the ship came into the territorial waters, and that whole area is always mixed up. My personal belief on that is that someone's decided to show that they're not really surrendering. He's being a hard ass. And, both sides, this is posturing. This is largely, I think, posturing before a final agreement.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we predicted when we talked about it before. All right, well, if we got nothing else.
Yeah.
All right, and there you have it. Another show in the can. Thanks for listening, and be sure to tell everyone you know, plus strangers on the street about us. We're back, you know where we are and you know how to talk to us, so please, there's no excuse to stay silent. We'll be back in another 7 days, so stick around, and until then, take care. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Bitchspot Report podcast. We invite listeners to interact with the show by commenting on our website at report.jdragononline.com. We can also be found on most social media sites, including Facebook, Google+, Tumblr, and Twitter. You can also listen on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Player FM, as well as on the aforementioned website. New episodes post every Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific. Those interested in being on the air, please visit our website. All instructions are there. We appreciate our listeners and supporters. We couldn't do this without you.